Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to the LionHeart Talks podcast. This episode is part of our third series, and in today's episode we're going to be talking all about neurodiversity in the workplace. But before we go any further, let me introduce myself. I'm Jo Grant, Training and Wellbeing Projects Manager at LionHeart, and I'm pleased to be joined today by one of our friends at AbilityRE, Vanessa Curtis. Hello, Vanessa.
Hello.
So, the area of neurodiversity and neurodivergence is one that we've heard more and more about in recent years, but one I think many people still don't really understand. And so, something I'm really looking forward to discussing with you today, Vanessa. Before we go any further, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about AbilityRE?
Certainly, I can. Thank you for inviting me today, first of all. My name's Vanessa Curtis. I am a Senior Director at CBRE. I am a member of the RICS Governing Council, and as you said, I am founder and chair of AbilityRE. AbilityRE is a non-profit organisation working to raise awareness and inclusion of disability, neurodiversity, mental ill health, and long-term health conditions within real estate and the built environment. And so we like to do awareness events and cool podcasts like this one, and guidance for organisations and support for individuals. That's us.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So, why is neurodiversity or neurodivergence of interest to you?
For me, it started out obviously as many things do, very personally. Both of my children have ADHD, and my eldest has autism. And the journey started obviously with the eldest when we were trying to get a diagnosis, which takes far too long. And we were going to these sessions with the psychiatrist, and they were asking all the questions. Does this happen? Does that happen? Do you find he does this? And I started thinking, well, yes, he does. And so do I, actually.
Wow.
It sounded very familiar. So I then got my own diagnosis, after the age of 40, which was a bit of a shock, but also quite enlightening. And then I think a lot of things started to click into place about my life and my career and some of the challenges that I experienced. And then I started chatting to some other people in the industry who had faced similar challenges, and we all agreed that we needed to do something about it. And thus, AbilityRE was born.
Oh, what a great reason. And something obviously that's of so much interest to yourself. I think what you've just explained is something I've heard actually from quite a few people in recent years, that it wasn't until they were trying to look for a diagnosis for a child that everything started to piece together, and they found themselves with a diagnosis as well.
Yeah, especially with women, because we mask more and we're less noticeable in schools, so we slip through the net. So certainly a lot of women are getting diagnosed as mothers rather than, as kids. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so as I said, we've heard the term neurodiversity used a lot more in recent years, along with other terms such as neurodivergence, neurodivergent, and neurotypical. I think many people can find those terms still quite confusing. So I was wondering if maybe the best place to start today would be for a little bit of an explanation on some of those terms. Is that something you could try and help us with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the neurodiversity term is basically a way of saying that everyone's brain is different.
Right.
It works differently. So that's every single human being. There is neurodiversity amongst us as a society, right? Neurodivergence is where you're kind of on the diagnosable level of that. So there are thresholds of criteria to have a diagnosis. So that is when you are neurodivergent, if you like. So I am neurodivergent. And then obviously neurotypical is someone who, while still being on that huge human scale of neurodiversity, which we all are, is not reaching any thresholds. And they are now finding that, even if you do things like brain scans, there are different structural changes in the brain. So some areas are smaller,
Okay.
some areas are bigger.
Right.
And when you do certain tasks, different areas light up if you're neurotypical and neurodivergent, which is fascinating. So I think the confusion can come in because certainly I think when these terms were first starting to be used and people were becoming more aware of them, there was a perception that, sort of, say, neurodivergent might be offensive.
Right.
So people didn't want to be neurodivergent. They just described themselves as neurodiverse.
Yep.
But I think it's more acceptable now.
Yeah.
I would always just say if you're talking to someone, take their lead about how they would like it referred to.
Okay. We still hear that neurodiverse when people really mean neurodivergent used quite often at the moment. So it's really good to try and clear that up and have these conversations so that people can increase understanding. And when we're talking about someone being neurodivergent, then what types of diagnosis are we talking about?
So neurodivergent covers a range: ADHD, autism or ASD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's. And what we're finding now, the science is showing that really if you are neurodivergent, while you may have a diagnosis for one, the chances are that you will have, to a greater or lesser extent, bits of them all. So there will be some where you hit the diagnostic criteria and some where you don't. But the there will be different areas that you struggle with. It's just the neurodivergent spiky profile, which you may have heard of, which is, whether you are really, really good at some things and struggle
Okay.
slightly more with other things.
Yeah. I appreciate you've just listed out a whole group of different sort of diagnosis conditions. Is conditions an acceptable term there?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
for it. But thank you for asking. I think that's a great place to start.
Never quite sure sometimes.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
think a lot of people aren't. And generally, I think it's a really important point because I always think if people shy away from having that conversation because they're a bit scared of putting a foot wrong or saying the wrong thing, we never open up about this stuff and we never have the conversation. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers. So I truly think it's better to have the conversation and ask,
Yeah.
honestly.
And most of the time, I think people are potentially, like say, worried about saying the wrong thing, so say nothing. And
Yeah,
actually, there's never, very rarely any sort of negative intention with asking that
no,
question. It's wanting to
absolutely.
get your understanding right, isn't it? And make sure that you're using the right
Absolutely.
language going forward. So let's go get with this. I appreciate we're talking about a number of different conditions, but can you maybe talk about some of the challenges that someone that's neurodivergent might face, and then also how that may affect them in the workplace?
Yeah. Okay. So depending on their neurodivergent makeup, if you will, um, some of the things that you might see someone struggling with are timekeeping,
Okay.
or getting on and starting on challenging tasks. Like they might be putting it off, um, or they might be quite sensitive if they get feedback, and react defensively to it. Um, or you might find that there are sort of challenges with sort of written work, spelling mistakes or grammar or that kind of thing. You might find people who you think are very unflexible. So if you try and change meetings around, they don't like it. Um, and I think the challenge with all of these things is understanding why. So not making the assumption that they're being difficult, but trying to understand what's kind of behind that and what we can do about it to support them in the workplace.
So that's some of the challenges, but also there must be lots of strengths as well for a different way of thinking must bring some positives.
Oh, there's loads of good stuff associated with being neurodivergent if we can manage it correctly. So, as with all diversity, right, which is why we all want diverse teams, people who are neurodivergent, they can bring in a very different approach to problem solving. They can be very creative and innovative, very entrepreneurial. You find a lot of entrepreneurs are neurodivergent. They can see the big picture and sort of step back and look at everything and how it slots together in a way that sometimes a neurotypical person can't. They can actually be hugely productive. So they've done some studies where if people are in the right environment who are neurodivergent, they can actually be far more productive than a neurotypical person because they can get into a real hyper-focus zone and like plow through something that they're under, that they're really keen on. They can also spot things that maybe other people wouldn't. So if they have autistic type tendencies, or they're very detail oriented, they can look at big things and sort of say, actually, that doesn't seem quite right, and spot things that maybe someone wouldn't. They're very values driven. So ethically very values driven about what's right, what's wrong. There can be a lot of positives if you find the right role and the right way of working in it.
Do you think that the built environment and sort of surveying in general has an appeal to someone potentially with certain types of neurodivergence?
Yeah, no, I've met loads of people in this industry here in Neurodivergent, and it's great. I mean, I love my role because it's different all the time,
Right.
which is fantastic for me as an ADHDer. I never know what I'm going to expect. There is no aspect of routine in my role, and I love that. I thrive on that. I also have the ability to kind of really take things in the direction that, I would like to. I can apply all my entrepreneurial
Right.
skills
Yeah.
into kind of problem solving for my clients. There's loads of good stuff in real estate in the built environment. I've met people who are sort of dyslexic, and people who are dyslexic often have this great sort of visual memory and ability to see things in kind of almost a 3D.
Yep.
And if you're looking at a building surveyor, or an architect even, that's incredible skill. So you'll find these people really attracted to these types of roles. So yes, there's lots of us here, and I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in this industry for people who are neurodivergent, definitely.
The key thing is about finding the right roles, the roles that suit your strengths and your abilities, and needing workplaces to be open to sort of seeing that, and the benefits of having different people in their teams. How do you think workplaces are managing neurodiverse employees at the moment? Do you think it's something that's working well? Do you think there's a lot of work to be done in the area? Does it vary from workplace to workplace?
I think it varies from line manager to line manager, if I'm
Okay, so
honest.
even within a workplace, it can be varied.
Absolutely. I think most organizations now, they have all the policies and they have good intent and they want to include everyone and they want diverse intakes of people. And I think all of that's fantastic. I still think there's room for that to trickle down into direct line management and some of the assumptions that I think people maybe don't even realize they're making. So I think with teams, you can see one thing, and then the human, we all do it. It's kind of built in. We're programmed to kind of see one thing, and then read that signal and react in a certain way. And that's right back to when we were cavemen. It's survival, So we all do it, and I think it's just being aware that now sometimes those signals are telling us one thing, and they could be incorrect. So just to take some examples that I have had through my career, just to go very personally, someone said to me, "Well, why don't you just block out some time in your diary and force yourself to focus?" And I'm like, "That's brilliant. I wish I'd thought of that." If it was that easy, if I could make my brain focus, I wouldn't have ADHD.
Yeah.
obviously I speak to a lot of people with AbilityRE, and we've had dyslexic colleagues sort of say, well, why don't you just proofread your work before you send it? Or why don't you just use spell check? And the fact is, if you're dyslexic, you can proofread your work 25 times, but you read what you think you've written because your brain doesn't see what they put there in the first place. So there has to be something else there to stop it. So it's not a lack of commitment. It's not a lack of effort. It's not that you're not trying or you're not aware, you don't care. Um, I think it's understanding that things can be driven actually from the best place. So another example, I've had feedback in appraisals previously where someone sort of said that they don't think I'm listening in a meeting, or they didn't think I was paying attention, and actually what I was doing was not maintaining eye contact. So when I dug into it, they thought I wasn't listening because I was looking down. Whereas actually, when I'm trying to really focus, because my ADHD brain picks up everything, sometimes looking down helps me block out other stimuli and actually focus more on what that person is saying to me. So it helps my brain really focus in on the important thing. And once I sort of explained that, they went, "Oh, right, I just thought you weren't paying attention. I didn't think you were interested." And I was like, "No, not at all." So it's just being aware that sometimes, those things that we see aren't necessarily meaning what we think they mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. I guess it's also, to some level, having that self-awareness of perhaps some of those behaviours within yourself and being able to sort of preempt that. Maybe if you were moving workplaces or working with someone new, occasionally being able to preempt what may be coming from conversations you've had with other people before, so that not looking at someone when they're talking to you, sort of,
Yeah.
or I don't know, maybe for some person doodling while they're having a conversation, things like that.
Which I do, and it helps.
Yeah.
And I actually, I think there's been learnings for me, and obviously I've been in the industry a little while now, so I've had the opportunity to learn. I think it's harder for people who don't necessarily know they have a diagnosis, or haven't had a formal diagnosis, because there are a lot of adults out there who are not aware that they have a neurodivergent condition. But I have kind of adapted to things like, when I came onto my current client, I didn't say, "By the way, I've got ADHD," because I think a lot of people then make assumptions again that aren't correct. What I did say is, quite often in meetings, I'll be taking notes because it helps me focus and process, but I am definitely listening to you. And they went, "Right, okay." So it's more of a, this is my way of working, but I'm still on it, and they're real comfortable with that. So there are ways of kind of signposting, and it doesn't need to be a revealing of a personal medical information. It can be, this is my communication style.
And it just stops that assumption as well, doesn't it, then, from happening, perhaps, if you don't mention it at the start. So you talked there about there being more and more women being diagnosed with things like ADHD, particularly in their 40s. You talked about there being potentially quite a few people within a workplace that just don't know that they potentially have a diagnosable condition.
Mhm.
Do you think there's differences there, though, depending on a condition? So, for example, I think I'm a similar age to you, and something like dyslexia is more likely to have been diagnosed at school. So it's something that they've got used to, perhaps know their strategies for working with their condition, because they've been able to learn those through school, college, university.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody now being diagnosed with ADHD, there was perhaps a completely different misconception of who that affected and how.
Absolutely. And it varies hugely. And I think there's if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. It's not a blueprint, so everyone is completely different. But yes, I mean, statistically in the population, we think about 1 in 7 of us is neurodivergent. And within the kind of adult working population, we think that there could be as many as 50% of those people don't actually know that they are neurodivergent, or don't have a formal diagnosis. So when workplaces are supporting people or working with an employee who seemingly has a challenge with something,
Yep.
it's really important to realize that, you can't go, well, have you got a medical diagnosis? Because if so, we can offer X.
Right.
And I think that's one thing that I always try to avoid when I'm talking to organizations as AbilityRE is,
Right.
first of all, putting a label on it doesn't really make any difference. If they are working with the HR team or their line manager because there is a challenge, you don't have to put a name on it from an official medical point of view to provide the right support, because sometimes the right support can be very, very quick and easy to implement. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. I think that's one thing that, again, sometimes line managers or organizations are afraid of, is kind of opening that Pandora's box of really complicated things and, people who aren't doing the full job and lots of expensive technology. And it really doesn't have to be. It can be as simple as kind of changing the way that you confirm what you want or what outputs you're expecting as a line manager. So you give it verbally, but then you follow it up with in writing so they can refer back to it. Very simple things. And those types of things they help everyone, right? They don't just help the neurodivergent person. So if you signpost what a meeting is about before, that helps everyone in the team, not just the neurodivergent person. Same as throwing out a few agreed actions and deliverable timelines after a meeting. That helps everyone in the team, not just the neurodivergent individual. So there are some things that people can implement that can be really quick and easy that make all the difference.
Are you able to give any other examples of that? Things that
Yeah,
workplaces
there's
could be implementing?
there's loads of good stuff. So I think if procrastination is an issue, and this is one that I actually implement for myself now, um, putting in interim milestones can force the getting going. So it's that very first hurdle with ADHD. So if someone's really struggling to get on with a big project and there's like a 3-month window, and you know that an individual is kind of leaving it till the week before, and then they start to panic, but that's when they thrive.
Yeah.
Break it up. Give it a, we're going to do section 1 by week 1, and we're going to do section 2 by week 2, and create the interim milestones. And then that kind of gets over that huge project, but a long time away, so I don't need to deal with it yet kind of thing. Allowing people to sort of focus, having a distraction-free time window where they can get into their hyper-focus and really deliver without people interrupting them, because once you're disrupted from that, it's really hard to get back into it. Also, just being able to pick your working environment. So if you are someone who is distracted from noise or smells, or I have hypersensitive hearing, and sometimes like even background noise, or I was actually in the office the other day and they were playing some Christmas music downstairs, but I could hear it.
Oh,
And I was like, ah, and I ended up going up a couple of floors. I don't think anyone else could hear it, but I ended up kind of taking myself up a couple of floors so I couldn't hear it either. And just that kind of ability to take myself off, and work somewhere else without a boss going, well, hang on, why are you working on that floor? Really helped, because then I could get on with it. I think simple things like being able to talk to people that you're working with about how best to help them and support them. I mean, again, it's about that open and honest conversation and not being afraid of saying the wrong thing, but listening to understand. Enabling closed captions on meetings, internal meetings, is a really easy thing to do. Allowing people to have the transcript on, and then download it afterwards so they can refer to it if you're having a virtual meeting, is a brilliant thing. As I said, being clear about agendas and minutes really helps people to know what's going on. Avoiding last minute cancellations if at all possible. I have worked in places, I know we're all in a really fast-paced environment, but sometimes it almost feels like they move around about 10 times before you actually get together, and for some people that's really hard. So I know internal meetings are easier to move than external ones, but I think there needs to be an understanding that some people struggle with that kind of constant changing of their expectation and their diary and that kind of thing. Other things, like really easy things like noise cancelling headphones. I take my headphones into the office, and sometimes I'm not even playing any background music or anything. I just have them on my head so that they're blocking out the noise. Flexible hour timing, work-wise as well, if it's possible. sometimes I wake up at 5 a.m. and my brain's like, I'm ready to go, and I can do several hours, and then by kind of 11 or 12, my brain is like, right, I need a break now, and I have to go for a walk. So just don't look at someone who's not at their desk 9 to 5 and make the assumption again that they're not working. Let them work to their own flexible, natural rhythm, and then look at the outputs. That's the important thing. Allowing stimming as well. That's a good one. So for anyone who's listening, stimming is kind of where people have fiddle toys or things that they fidget with. I am a pen and hair bobble stimmer. I do it all the time. It helps me focus. I have been told actually once in presentation training that it made me look nervous, and they tried to make me put it down, but then that stopped my brain from functioning completely.
Okay. Yeah.
So just allowing kind of movement and stimming or doodling because it helps.
Fair enough.
And basic office etiquette, try to avoid microwaving smelly food and having it at your desk. The poor person next to you can't focus because of the smell. There's lots of easy things that we can do to support people that don't take a massive amount of time or effort.
I think it's really interesting and really helpful for people to hear, because sometimes, like you say, the assumption is that it's big changes that might need to be made and expensive changes that need to be made. But most of what you've just listed there should be quite easily implementable for workplaces, for managers, and benefit both neurodivergent and in some cases neurotypical employees as well.
Absolutely. And I think they are the two biggest barriers, the misinterpretation of someone, and making the assumption, and the fear of kind of using the wrong words.
Yeah.
And, so you sort of hold back from having the conversation about what someone is struggling with, when actually, you can have a really constructive conversation about how better to support them or how you can enable them. And again, fear of a sudden budget impact when actually it really doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
So if we could get that message out to all of the line managers, I think we'd move forward in a huge direction very quickly.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. I think it's so important to have these conversations and to provide things like this podcast. I know you've done webinar training with us before, for people to listen to find out more as they need to. So as we come to the end of this episode, I did want to remind our listeners about LionHeart. If you are an RICS professional, then we are here to support you. So please do take a look at our website to find out more. There is more content on neurodiversity on our website, including a recorded webinar with Vanessa, some panel discussions with some of the LionHeart staff and ambassadors as well, which you might find interesting. Thank you for listening to the LionHeart Talks podcast. If you've been affected by anything that we've talked about today, then please do take a look, as I said, at the website. I've been your host, Jo Grant, and this has been my lovely guest. Thank you for joining me, Vanessa Curtis.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.